There are things no one ever teaches you how to understand. A message that never arrived. A promised call that was never made. A deep gaze, followed by silence. You sit in the kitchen at the end of the day. The tea has gone cold, and your heart still holds a quiet warmth for things that never found a name. They once looked at you as if you were something they had lost long ago. They once stayed silent longer than usual, and you felt it a connection, real, deep. But then they disappeared. No explanation, no goodbye, no reason. All that remains is you, and a question no one will answer. Why did they pull away from me when so clearly they wanted me to stay? Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Maybe you didn't just enter their heart. Maybe you shook the very walls they spent their entire youth building." Picture this. Someone grows up believing they must be strong to be loved, that emotions are weakness, that silence is safety. Then one day, you show up. No noise, no pressure, just a calm, sincere presence so honest, so unmistakable. They can no longer hide. You didn't just make them feel loved. You made them feel seen. And for some, that is even more terrifying than love. You see them hesitate, then avoid, then disappear. Not because you were wrong, not because you weren't enough, but because the truth you touched made it impossible for them to keep running from themselves. This video is for you, for the one who was once loved in silence, for the one who became a mirror so clear it unsettled another soul. With the light of their own reflection, we will walk together through the deepest layers of the psyche, through the shadows, the fears, the truths not everyone dares to face, not to hold on to them, but to return to you, the one who has always deserved to stay. They wanted you, not in a fleeting, superficial way, not just because you were kind or their type. They wanted you in a way that made it impossible to stop thinking about you in the quiet of the night, or when something familiar passed by. A beam of afternoon sunlight, an old song, a scent from someone's home across the street. And then they pulled away. They vanished. They avoided you. You may have thought, if they truly wanted me, why didn't they say it? But here's what you need to know. When one soul touches another, love isn't always the first reflex. Sometimes the first reflex is fear. Carl Jung called it the inner conflict, a quiet battle between the two most powerful forces in the human psyche, the longing to connect and the fear of being truly seen. Have you ever met someone and felt like they've known you forever, even though you just said, hello? Someone whose presence made it impossible for you to keep pretending. Now reverse that. You were that person for them. You were the one who made it impossible for them to keep living in the role they'd grown used to. The independent one. The one who doesn't need anyone. The busy one. The one who feels nothing. You didn't hurt them. You simply made them feel. And for someone who spent their life avoiding emotions, feeling is something they learned to fear early on. Not because they were cold, but because they were once hurt by those very emotions. Someone who cried as a child and was called weak. Someone who opened up and was betrayed. Someone who loved deeply and was abandoned without explanation. So they learned to shut the door, not completely, just enough, so no one could reach their heart again. And then you arrived. You weren't loud. You weren't forceful. You were simply present, with eyes that listened, a voice that didn't judge, and a warmth they had no idea how to handle. That's when the war began. The longing to be near you whispered, "This is what I once silently prayed for." But fear spoke louder. If they see the real you, the parts you've rejected, they'll leave. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." So they chose to avoid you instead of facing themselves. It was an unconscious choice, but a heavy one. It wasn't that you weren't enough. It was that you were too much for a soul not yet ready, too honest for someone still performing a role, too kind for someone used to conditional love, too clear for someone who had only known ambiguity and self-doubt. They felt out of control, not because you controlled them, but because the feelings they had for you no longer fit within their safe zone. It broke their mold. It defied their logic, and for an undeveloped ego, that felt like a threat. They weren't avoiding you. They were avoiding what you made them confront. You made them feel reminded of what they once wanted, but never admitted. Aware that they still longed to be loved unconditionally. In touch with the softness inside them no one ever embraced. They didn't run because you asked too much. They ran because real love always demands transformation. And transformation, as beautiful as it is, always comes with loss. The loss of the old self, the loss of control, the loss of the mask they once believed was their identity. They said they needed time. They said they weren't ready. They said you were too good. You heard those words, and your heart broke quietly. You began to doubt yourself. But pause for a moment, because if you're still listening to this, I want you to know you were not rejected. Your soul was recognized, and that scared them. True love doesn't just make us feel good. It makes us feel real. And the cost of being real is letting go of every role we've played. For many people, especially those who've lived in defense, their whole life that cost is too high. So they go quiet. They avoid. They disappear. You might want to chase them. You might think that if you just try hard enough, they'll come back. But the truth is, they must walk through their own battle. And that is not a war you can fight for them. So what should you do? You must not judge yourself by their silence. You must not dim your light to make them less afraid. You must stay with yourself, even when part of you wants to leave just to be chosen. They will think of you. They might remember you for the rest of their life, but only when they dare to walk through their own wall will they be able to truly come close. And until that day comes, you do not need to wait. You just need to keep becoming the person they once trembled for. Not everyone understands why your kindness makes people pull away. Not everyone knows that the most beautiful parts of you, your sincerity, your listening eyes, your unguarded heart, can awaken something very ancient and very frightened inside the other person. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the psychological shadow, the part of the ego that every person denies, rejects, or hides in order to survive in society, in their family, or even in their own childhood. The shadow is not evil. It is simply what has not yet been loved. Inside a man who constantly avoids emotional connection, there may be a little boy who was once scolded for crying. Inside a woman who is always controlling and cold, there may be a teenage girl who was hurt for showing her true feelings. And within the person you once felt a deep soul connection with, there is also a part like that, a part that only you, by the way you love, unintentionally awakened. You didn't remind them of someone else. You reminded them of a part of themselves they had long buried. You came close, without calculation, without hiding, without defense, and that for a soul that is not yet healed feels like an earthquake. The shadow doesn't disappear. It hides and it acts. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When that person avoids you, they may say very rational things. "I'm not ready. I don't want to hurt you. I need time to focus on myself." But underneath all those words is the fear of being seen, of being exposed, of having every layer of disguise stripped away, layers they've been wearing for years. You didn't try to do that, but light always reveals the shadow. And that's what made you a mirror. You are the mirror they didn't dare look into. When you love someone deeply, sincerely, without control, when you see them and stay, when you accept them, without asking them to be better, you unintentionally invite them back to themselves. But for those who've never been truly seen by anyone, that's not easy. It doesn't feel like love. It feels like being exposed. They might feel weak in front of you. They might feel not good enough, unworthy, vulnerable, not because you said anything to hurt them, but because you triggered a pain that has existed inside them for a long time, and they don't have the inner tools to deal with it. Your presence becomes an emotional trigger. You don't have to do anything. Just by being present, you are enough to make them remember the feeling of being abandoned, the feeling of not being heard, the belief that I'm not lovable. None of that came from you. It came from their unhealed past, and you were merely the catalyst. They are not running from you. They are running from the emotional flood you accidentally activated. They may idealize you, then suddenly reject you. They may say you're too good, then vanish as if you never existed. They may find excuses to be angry, to distance themselves, just to keep space between you. All of those behaviors, you need to know, do not reflect your worth. They reflect the depth of their unresolved shadow. Jung called this shadow projection, projecting their darkness onto someone else. When someone hasn't made peace with their fear of abandonment, they'll believe you will leave. When someone hasn't healed their shame, they'll imagine you're silently judging them. When someone still carries the belief, I'm not enough, they'll assume you'll eventually grow tired of them. And so they retreat before being truly seen, before you get close enough to notice the cracks they've been hiding, before they have to choose between loving you or clinging to their old identity. And most of the time, they choose the old, because the old is familiar. Even if it's lonely, you are the beginning of transformation. But they are not yet ready for that journey. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And the truth is, when they saw you, they also saw themselves more clearly, and that scared them. A quiet story in many lives. Many middle-aged women have written to me, "I loved him with peace, but he left as if I were a storm. I never asked for anything. I was just there, listening, sharing, present, and then one day, he said he didn't deserve me and cut all contact." If you've been through that, you are not alone. And more importantly, you were not wrong. You were not too much. You were not too deep. You were simply light that arrived at the right time, and their shadow wasn't ready to face it. So, what should you do when they run? Do not try to pull them back. Do not shrink yourself. Do not apologize for loving too sincerely. Hold space for them. If one day they return to themselves, and space for you to continue becoming the person you have courageously become. The truth is, you cannot heal their shadow, but you can keep your own light alive, because that light, one day, will lead you to the right person, someone who doesn't run from being seen, someone who isn't afraid of being loved, someone who doesn't disappear when they realize you are home. There are people who grow up never having truly been held, not because their parents didn't love them, but because their parents, too, had grown up in emotional coldness. They learned to survive not through affection, but through distance, through silence, through becoming strong, independent, and not relying on anyone. And so, the child within them was never truly seen, never comforted, never told. You are allowed to be vulnerable and still loved. These unspoken wounds, Jung called them emotional complexes. Carl Jung defined a complex as a cluster of emotions, memories, and unconscious beliefs formed by intense emotional experiences in the past, especially in childhood. And the frightening truth is, even when we don't remember them, they live within us. They guide our reactions, our emotions, our choices, and we think they're our free will. Imagine this: a child who once reached out to be held and was pushed away, who once shared their sadness and was laughed at, who once loved someone deeply and was abandoned without explanation. That child never disappeared. It simply learned to go quiet and wrapped all its feelings into a whisper of the unconscious. Don't believe anymore. Love equals pain. If I need someone, I'll get hurt, and then you arrived with your gentle presence, without pressure, without control. You gave without calculation. You were patient. You believed in connection. But for someone still driven by a complex, all of that didn't make them feel safe. It made them feel afraid, not because you did something wrong, but because you touched a fear they never had the words to name. They want to believe you, but the old wounds whisper, "She'll leave, just like the others. He can't truly love me. If I let myself believe in this love, I'll be hurt again." Here are some common types of complexes. Abandonment complex. The wound of being left behind, always on guard, fearing others will leave. When they feel themselves needing someone too much, they pull away first to avoid being abandoned. Shame complex. The wound of feeling inherently flawed. Believing they are too much or not enough to be loved. When someone loves them genuinely, they think they just don't know the real me yet. Trust complex. The loss of faith in connection. Believing that opening up will lead to being used or betrayed. When the other person is sincere, they don't trust it because past experience tells them otherwise. Most people with these complexes don't realize it. They go to work, they succeed, they maintain relationships, but when they meet someone who can truly see them like you, their defenses activate because you are not just a person. You are an invitation to return to the part of themselves they've long hidden away. You might be the first person who never hurt them, and yet they still react as if you will. That's how the nervous system learns from the past. It doesn't distinguish between now and memory. It only needs a familiar sensation and immediately triggers a safe response. That response might be silence, disappearing, unexplained anger, building walls with logic. You feel them pull away after a moment of deep closeness. You feel them reject you right after they just opened up, and you feel confused. But what you need to understand is their reaction is not about you. It's about the child within them who was never held when it mattered. Your love isn't wrong. It just came too close to a wound that was never healed. Many women have told me, "I just wanted him to know I was there. I didn't need promises, only presence. I didn't ask for anything. So why was I still left behind?" I understand, and Carl Jung understood too, because that is the tragedy of deep connections. We don't just love the person. We love the child inside them, but we cannot step past the wall they built to protect it. So what can you do? Understand that no one can heal someone else's complex for them. You can awaken something, but only they can turn inward and hold the child within themselves. Don't try to prove you are safe. The more you try to convince them, the more you get pulled into a logic loop they're not truly listening to. Care for your own inner child. If their withdrawal makes you feel abandoned, ask, what part of me is being triggered? If the pain feels overwhelming, write a letter to the part of you that was once ignored. You can't stop them from leaving, but you can choose to stay with yourself. The beautiful and heartbreaking truth is you love someone through their cracks. You saw what they couldn't yet see. You loved the part they believed no one could ever love. And even if they couldn't stay, that love was real. It was worthy, and it is what will lead you back to yourself. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." You're already doing that. You are illuminating yourself through the journey of loving someone who could not yet love back in wholeness. There is something you need to know before you move forward. Not everyone has the courage to be seen. We live in a world where I'm fine is a form of armor, where strength, control, and self-sufficiency are seen as symbols of success. And to survive in that world, many people have had to create another version of themselves, what Carl Jung called the persona, the psychological mask people wear to be accepted, admired, and safe. The persona is not about being fake. It's about defense. It's a survival strategy. Imagine someone who was once ridiculed for their emotions. As they grew up, they built the image of someone cold and composed. Someone who was rejected for needing too much love now lives as if no one can truly reach them. Not because they lack feelings, but because emotions are what once made them feel unsafe. And then you showed up, without trying, without fixing. Just by being present, you unknowingly began to shake their mask. You weren't trying to expose them. You simply wanted to love them. But to them, it felt like the same thing. Because real love doesn't fall for what they display. It touches the parts they've never dared to show. Carl Jung wrote, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself, as well as others, think one is. The persona is the image they believe the world wants to see. The man who doesn't need anyone, the woman who is always fine, the partner who is cold and mysterious, the spouse who is strong and rational, and they've lived with it for so long, they've forgotten who they truly are beneath it. Then one day, you looked at them, really looked, you listened to what no one else had heard. You stayed, even when they showed their vulnerability, and suddenly, nothing felt safe anymore. You didn't hurt them, but you made them drop the act. You made them realize they've been performing, they've been pretending, they've been trying to make you love a good enough version of themselves, and that, to them, is an identity crisis, because if they let the mask fall, who will they be? They've long believed, if I'm not strong, who will love me? If I don't act okay, who will stay? If I don't stay in control, everything will fall apart. You, with your genuine gaze and gentle heart, didn't need them to be strong, or okay, or perfect. You just needed them to be real. And paradoxically, that's what made them want to run. The truth is, their false self felt threatened, not because you were a danger, but because your presence touched the part their mask couldn't protect. You showed them the gap between who they are in the world and who they are inside. And that gap could no longer be hidden. The fear of losing control. That's why they pull away when love gets real. You may have heard them say, "I'm not good at relationships. I don't know how to be close to someone and still be myself. I feel weak when I love someone too much." That's the persona fighting for control over the soul. And the soul, when it truly wants to connect, refuses to live in a cage. You didn't need them to be perfect, but they needed to feel perfect in order to feel worthy of you, because they never truly believed that their real self was enough. You became the first person who didn't require them to pretend, and they didn't know how to live like that. They feared, if someone sees the real me, they'll be disappointed. If I live through my emotions, I'll lose the person I love. When the persona takes over, they choose escape over honesty. They start rationalizing. "I don't want to hurt you. You deserve someone better. I'm not ready." You hear those words and wonder, if they weren't ready, why did they open up? If they didn't want to hurt me, why did they disappear without a word? The answer is, their persona was in control. Carl Jung once said, "The larger the persona, the more shadow it casts. The more perfect the mask, the bigger the darkness behind it. And you, the one who could see through the mask, became the greatest threat to their false sense of stability." Love didn't make them feel out of control. It was the fact that they started to want love that made them feel unsafe. You may think you did something wrong. You may hurt from their avoidance, but in truth, you did the most powerful thing one soul can do for another. You reminded them of who they are. So, what can you do if they're still wearing the mask? Don't try to rip it off. That only makes them defend it more fiercely. Hold truth and gentleness together. You can see them and not pressure them. You can love fully without begging. You can be present without being their savior. Keep living in your truth. That gives them a new model, a new belief, a different way of being one they can return to if they're ready. And if they never return, know this: you loved without pretending. You showed up with your whole heart. You lived in the light while they were still afraid of themselves. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And when you live authentically, you give others the chance to do the same. Whether they take that chance or not, you remain the gift." Have you ever felt misunderstood in a relationship where all you offered was love? Have you ever felt like the person wasn't looking at you, but at their own unhealed pain through you? They accused you of things you never did. They assigned you intentions you never had. They called you by a name that someone from their past once carried, not because you were wrong, but because you became a blank screen, and they were replaying a film that never had closure. Carl Jung called this projection the psychological phenomenon of casting inner material onto others. When someone is unable or not yet ready to face what lies deep within, unprocessed emotions, unhealed memories, fractured beliefs, they unconsciously project those things onto others. You are not seen for who you are. You are seen through the lens of how they were hurt. Someone who was once betrayed will find you suspicious, even if you are loyal. Someone who was once abandoned will expect you to leave, even when you choose to stay. Someone who was once controlled will feel manipulated, even if all you did was care. And in that chaos, you begin to question yourself. Did I do something wrong? Am I too much? How much of myself should I shrink to be accepted? The answer is no. You are not wrong. You are not too much. You're simply standing too close to a wound in them that has never healed. Projection is not intentional. It is the reflex of a soul not yet integrated. Jung once wrote, "We always see our own unavowed mistakes in our opponent. We see what is still unacknowledged in ourselves and others, because that feels safer, easier, less painful than turning inward." You might become the abandoner if they were neglected by their parents, the too good to be true if they don't believe they're worthy of love, the betrayer if they never learned how to trust. They love you, but they don't truly see you. They see their own reflection through you, and in that blur, they begin to retreat because you're not the one who hurt them, but you remind them of the one who did. It might be the mother who was always too busy, the father who was cold and absent, the partner who walked away without warning, the first love who taught them that love means sacrificing until nothing is left. And now, even though you come with sincerity, you are still placed in the same frame. Why? Because that is how the mind protects itself from re-experiencing old pain. If I push her away first, I won't be abandoned. If I hurt him before he hurts me, I'll stay safe. If I act cold, I won't be truly seen. You become the target of a battle you didn't start, and one you cannot win. You could do everything right. You could listen, yield, try to heal with them, but if they are not ready to see you with new eyes, they will keep living inside the old movie. You can't play a role just to fit a script they wrote in the past, because you didn't come from the wound. You came from love. How do you know when you're being projected onto? They overreact to small things you say or do. They assign you negative motives you never intended. They suddenly turn cold or distant for no clear reason. They say things like, "I know your type," even though you've never shown that behavior. You can explain, you can respond with care, you can wait for them to see the truth. But if they're not ready to turn inward, you'll remain a distorted image in a mirror they're afraid to clean. That is one of the deepest pains of a mature soul. Being misunderstood by the person they love the most. You don't feel angry. You just feel sad. Sad because, part of them recognizes you're different, but the other part, the fearful, defensive part, has taken over. Carl Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. If they could pause the reaction and turn inward, they would see you are not the enemy. You are the opportunity, the mirror, the one person safe enough to touch the cold, hidden terrain within them. But if they can't do that, you must let go. Not because you stopped loving, but because you've learned to love yourself enough not to keep getting hurt." So what can you do when you're being projected onto? Name what is happening. Recognize it as projection, not truth about you. Don't internalize their words. What they assign to you does not define you. It reveals them, not you. Return to your own truth. I know who I am. I know I came with love. I don't need anyone else to validate that for it to be true. Step back when needed. Not everyone deserves to be healed by you, especially those who use you as a place to offload their pain. You are not a projection screen. You are the light. You didn't come to repeat their past. You came to open a different future. And if they cannot walk that path with you, you must still continue. Carl Jung wrote, "You meet your destiny on the road you take to avoid it. If you are their destiny, they will meet you again as the version of themselves who is finally ready. The version that no longer casts old shadows on new people. The version that no longer confuses you with someone from the past. The version that is healed enough to see you with clear eyes. There are fleeting moments when you just know something sacred has occurred. A silent meeting of the eyes, a gentle touch. The heart never forgets. A conversation that seems ordinary yet keeps you awake for nights. There are no fireworks, no grand declarations, but deep within you, a very old part, a part you don't even have words for, knows this person is not like the others, and you are not wrong, because some people don't enter our lives by choice, but by recognition. Carl Jung called this soul recognition. It's not about physical attraction. It's not that you like their smile or feel compatible. It's a deeper knowing, as if your soul once knew theirs somewhere, from a time long forgotten. You don't know why, but they feel familiar, as if you're reuniting, not meeting for the first time, as if this life is just the continuation of something left unfinished in another. They feel it too, even if they never say it. They see you, and something goes still inside them. They feel seen, but not judged, safe and yet terrified, because this feels too real, and truth especially, the kind that defies logic, always unsettles the ego. You notice them pulling away, not walking away exactly, but creating distance. Words come less often. Messages become infrequent. The way they look at you doesn't linger like it used to. You wonder what went wrong. Did you say too much? Were you too available? Too easy to read? But the truth is, you did nothing wrong. You simply touched the deepest part of them, the part they have no language for, the part they are not yet ready to live with. In Jungian psychology, soul recognition does not equal soul readiness. Someone may feel you are their destiny and still lack the maturity to hold it. They may sense that you are the doorway to a deeper life, but their body and mind are still loyal to old patterns, the patterns of avoidance, defense, and fear of pain. They may see the light in you, but after living so long in darkness, that light feels blinding. Soul-level love is not the kind of love we learn from movies or novels. It's not romantic in a fairy tale way. It's not comfortable in the way we often dream about. Soul love arrives to transform you. It comes to break apart what no longer serves your truth. It's not here to make you momentarily happy, but to bring you back to the deepest version of yourself. And to do that, it must pass through shedding. It must touch old fears of abandonment, layers of protection, forgotten memories. When you're the one who touches that part in someone, you become more than the person they desire. You become the one they can no longer pretend around. They know that walking beside you would require change. They would have to let go of the roles they've clung to for years. They would have to face the emptiness inside, the inner child never comforted, the sadness they forced themselves to forget. Not everyone is ready for that. So even if their soul says yes, their ego still finds the nearest exit. You may hear them say things like, "I'm not ready for something serious. I need time to heal. I don't want to hurt you. I'm afraid I can't give you what you deserve." It all sounds reasonable. It sounds mature. But beneath those words is a fear of losing who they thought they were. A fear that if they step into this love, they'll no longer be the version of themselves they fought to preserve. You weren't wrong to believe in the connection, because the connection was real. You felt the things they couldn't say. You heard the silences no one else was patient enough to interpret, and you stayed not out of control, but out of love, not with expectations, but with presence. But what you need to understand is this: soul connection cannot survive if only one person is willing to grow. A deep relationship needs two brave hearts, two people willing to look within, let go of old roles, and accept truth, even when it's uncomfortable. If you've already stepped onto that path, but they have not, then their retreat is not a failure. It is honesty. The honesty of a soul still finding its way. And maybe, in that journey, they must walk alone. You cannot accelerate someone's growth. You cannot love them into readiness. You cannot make the choice their soul has not yet made. So you must let go, not because you've stopped loving, but because you've loved enough not to hold on to someone who is not yet ready to love you back with equal depth. Letting go is not an ending. Sometimes it's the only way to protect the sacredness of the connection. Because if you stay too long when they're not ready, you'll begin to doubt yourself. You'll shrink. You'll go quiet to make yourself fit. You'll walk on eggshells to keep from scaring them. And then you'll lose yourself. But soul love does not come to make you lose yourself. It comes to help you remember who you are if they return with a true heart, with maturity and courage. You'll know, and if they don't, you've still received something invaluable from the connection. The chance to see yourself more clearly, more deeply, more fully. You don't need to become anything else to be loved. You only need to become someone who no longer abandons themselves just to make someone stay. Their soul recognized you, but if they are not ready to choose you, you must be ready to choose yourself. Keep walking, not because you are cold, but because you are faithful to the truth that you loved with the most real and sacred parts of yourself. And love like that is never meaningless, even if it never began the way you hoped, even if it never ended with an embrace. Because sometimes souls come to touch, not to stay, but to awaken something in each other that was long forgotten. That is the meaning, and sometimes that alone is enough. Have you ever looked back at a silent ending and wondered, was I not good enough? If I had been more patient, more understanding, more gentle, would they have stayed? But the truth is this: it's not that you weren't enough. It's not that you were too much. It's not that you loved the wrong way. It's that the other person was not yet mature enough to stay when love became real, not yet integrated enough to see you with clear eyes, free from the dust of old wounds, not yet strong enough to face a love that required them to shed their armor and live authentically. And that, however painful, is still a form of truth. Carl Jung once said that nothing is more terrifying than facing oneself. Nothing makes us more unsettled than being stripped of our comfortable illusions. True love always does that. It doesn't just make people feel good. It asks them to grow up. And some people, when confronted with real love, shrink back like children being called upon in class, not because they don't want to be loved, but because a part of them doesn't believe they are worthy of receiving it. Someone who grows up with conditional love learns how to survive through performance. Only when I'm successful am I accepted. Only when I'm strong am I not rejected. Only when I don't need anyone am I safe. And then they meet you. You don't demand. You don't judge. You don't come with a scorecard in your hand. You love with presence. You love with truth. And that confuses them. No one has ever loved them the way you do. No one has ever seen them the way you have. No one has ever touched the part they've kept hidden and stayed. And that scares them. They fear that if they stay, one day, you'll see something in them that will make you leave. They fear that if they let you in, you'll be the one to take everything from them. Their facade, their control, the image they've worked so hard to uphold. So they retreat, not because you did anything wrong, but because they aren't strong enough to face the truth that lives inside you. You're not just another person. You are their unspoken test. You are the doorway to the life they once craved, but also feared enough to deny. And not everyone has the courage to walk through that door. Some turn away, not because they don't love you, but because loving you would require them to leave behind who they once were. And for many, letting go of the ego feels harder than death. You don't need to be angry. You don't need to try and understand them at all costs. Because sometimes what you need is not an explanation, but an acknowledgement that you loved honestly, and they weren't ready to hold that love. They didn't reject you. They rejected the journey you invited them into. They rejected the deepest part of themselves, and because you touched that part, you became the symbol of everything they aren't ready to face. And here is the saddest truth. You cannot help someone see a truth they are not ready to see. You cannot love for them. You cannot grow for them. You cannot open the door from the other side. All you can do is keep living in the love you carry within. A love that doesn't control, that doesn't demand, that doesn't need to be returned to be real. A love that, even if someone isn't ready to receive it, does not cost you yourself. Yes, there may be sleepless nights. You may wonder if they ever think of you, if they ever understood how much your quiet presence meant, if they ever miss the way your eyes saw them without asking for anything. You won't have all the answers, but you will have something far more valuable. The steadiness in your own heart that you remained yourself, even when they couldn't understand you. Because in the end, love is not defined by whether the other person returned it. It is defined by how much truth you brought to it. Sometimes, we don't meet the wrong person. We just meet them at the wrong time. At a time when they're still at war with themselves. When they still believe solitude is safer than truth. When they haven't yet sat with their broken pieces long enough to hold someone's hand without drawing blood. Don't blame yourself for loving someone who wasn't ready. Don't hate yourself for believing in a connection no one else could see. And don't let their silence make you question your intuition. You didn't imagine it. You weren't mistaken. You truly touched a part of their soul. And they know it. Even if they don't have the courage to admit it. Maybe one day they'll understand. Maybe they'll remember you not through details, but through a feeling. The feeling of being seen, of being understood, of being loved without having to earn it. And by then, you may already be somewhere else. Somewhere you no longer wait for them. Somewhere you've become the kind of woman who can love without losing herself. If they come back, you'll know how to tell whether they've returned as someone whole or just a shadow of who they once were. And if they never come back, you'll still have the most important thing, yourself. The one who dared to love deeply, walk far, and not fall when the others stopped walking. It's not that you weren't enough. It's that their journey hadn't yet reached the place where they could hold you. And you deserve someone who doesn't just recognize you, but is mature enough to choose you every day, with every decision, with every present and intentional touch. That person will come, and when they do, you won't have to convince them. You won't have to fight to be seen. You won't have to explain why you love so deeply. They'll look at you, and they'll stay, not because you loved them enough, but because they're finally enough to love you completely. You stayed longer than you should have. You waited, not because you were weak, but because you once believed they would return when they were ready. You didn't ask for a perfect ending, just an honest word, a gaze that didn't avoid yours, one moment of reaching out to hold your hand, but it never came. And then, on a very ordinary afternoon, you realized you could no longer wait, not because you stopped loving, but because you began to understand love cannot be held by only one person. And so, you let go, not in anger, not in tears, but with a quiet clarity in your heart, the kind of silence that comes when someone finally understands. I deserve a love that doesn't have to be begged for. Carl Jung once said, there is nothing more soul-destroying than abandoning yourself to hold on to someone who never truly held you back. And that's what you once did, not because you lacked self-respect, but because you believed that if you loved long enough, they would see. Maybe they did see, but they didn't choose to stay. And you no longer had the strength to keep calling the name of someone who had chosen silence. Letting go in that moment was not about giving up on them. It was about giving up the weight that made you smaller each day. You no longer wanted to live in the question. You no longer wanted to check your phone every morning. You no longer wanted to read between the lines just to know if you were loved. You began to return, not with an empty heart, but with a part of you quietly asking to be held by your own arms. You once thought they would be the one to stay when you were weak, but now you understand you are the one who will never abandon yourself. And that is a turning point. When you stop chasing someone, your inner space begins to widen, to heal, to breathe, to live. You'll still remember them. You will, because real love doesn't vanish overnight. You may hear a song, catch a scent, walk down a familiar street, and the memories will rush back. But this time, you won't drown in regret. You'll stand still, and you'll smile, because, you loved fully. And you no longer lost yourself in the process. You once thought letting go was failure. Now you know it's the most noble act of a soul that has learned to choose itself. Maybe they'll come back when they've grown enough, when they've faced their own shadow, when they've stopped pretending. And if that happens, you'll receive it not with hope, but with discernment, not because you need them now, but because you're whole enough to say yes or no without trembling in emptiness. And if they don't return, you'll still be okay, because you no longer live in waiting. You live in presence. Presence with yourself, with the dreams you once paused, with the body you once ignored, with the eyes of those who were always there, waiting for you to look back. Letting go, to others, may seem like an ending, but for you, it's a beginning. The beginning of a life no longer built on insecurity, no longer repeating old patterns of pain, no longer shrinking yourself to fit inside someone else's heart. You start walking without waiting for a message. You begin to smile without worrying who's watching. You begin to write, sing, cook, sleep well, without having to explain it to anyone. You live fully, truthfully, with nothing to prove. You no longer wait for someone to arrive before you begin your life. You choose to live, whether or not they choose you. That isn't indifference. That is freedom. A freedom born from heartbreak. A freedom no longer tied to promises, messages, or glances. You are no longer someone who lacks You are someone returning, not towards someone else, but back to your own heart. You understand now. A love that is worthy won't ask you to shrink, won't leave you waiting in the dark, won't require you to fill the void with hope. A worthy love is one that lets you be entirely yourself and still be held. Not having met that person yet doesn't mean they don't exist. Maybe they are learning their own lessons. Maybe the universe is holding you back to prepare you for a connection that won't repeat the old cycles. And right now, you are walking, not with a broken heart, but with a small light in your hand. That light is you, the light you once gave to others, now turned inward to illuminate yourself. No one else needs to lead you. No one else needs to hold your hand. You only need the faith that you chose yourself. And that is the first great love. After everything, letting go is not a loss. It is a quiet whisper that says, "Thank you for coming. Thank you for awakening me. And thank you for teaching me how to hold on to myself." If they return, they'll meet a different woman, one who no longer waits to be chosen because she has already chosen herself, one who no longer needs answers because she understands through her heart, one who no longer loves out of lack, but loves from wholeness. And if they never return, you'll still keep walking, gentler, stronger, and freer than ever. There was a time when you lived on hope, hope that they would come back, hope that they would understand, hope that they would recognize your worth. You placed your heart gently in the space they once occupied. You kept everything intact, as if they had only stepped away for a moment. You called it loyalty, called it deep love, called it belief in destiny. But then one day, you woke up with a strange feeling, not heaviness, not sharp pain, just the quiet realization that you no longer wanted them to return, not because you hated them, and not because you had forgotten, but because you began to see clearly what you needed most of all: peace. That peace didn't come from explanations. It didn't come from a late message. It didn't come from a reunion after months apart. It came in a single moment when you realized you deserve a life where you no longer have to wait for someone to understand you, where you don't have to adjust your breathing to match someone who never truly knew how to be present. You once believed that their return would be the perfect ending, but now you understand some stories don't need an ending to have meaning. Some connections don't need to go anywhere at all, because the very fact that they happened was enough to remind you of who you are. You stopped writing letters you never sent, stopped holding on to old messages, stopped imagining a reunion, not because you became cold, but because you began to live in the present, a place where they no longer stood beside you. You returned to each breath, to every morning cup of tea, to the paths you walked alone and whole. You learned how to love your life even without their name in it. You no longer hoped for a door to open. You simply hoped your heart would no longer tighten with longing, would no longer bleed every time an old song played. You began to see the world not through the lens of loss, but through the eyes of someone living fully, one day at a time. You saw new people not as replacements, but as presents. You let your heart soften, but not break so easily. You let the past stay in its rightful place behind you, and slowly, you stood firmly in your own world. Carl Jung once said, "Wounds don't disappear when we cover them with someone new. They disappear when we are brave enough to look at them and choose to let go." And you did that. You chose to return, not to someone else, but to yourself. You began to step into days that no longer required you to hold it together. You began to smile not for anyone else, but because your heart felt light. You began to sleep well no longer, waiting for a sound that never came. You no longer needed them to understand how deeply you had loved. You no longer needed an apology. You no longer needed a beautiful ending, because now you know the most beautiful ending is when you no longer cling to what no longer belongs to you. You once loved completely. That remains true. But now, you've chosen to love something even more sacred, peace. And peace is not loud. It doesn't arrive with grand entrances. It comes when you clear space within, when you no longer wait for a call, no longer dream of a return. You know now, if they were truly meant for you, they would never have made you live inside a question. They would never have left you alone with silence. They would never have made you love in the dark, by yourself. And because they did, you no longer need them. You need truth. You need the feeling of being yourself. You need a love that doesn't ask you to trade in your dignity. You need to breathe deeply, to sleep through the night without carrying the weight of waiting, to listen to your own heart without needing outside validation. You need a life that isn't centered around whether someone loves you or not, but around how fully you love yourself. And when that happens, you've truly grown, not in a cold, hardened, or falsely proud way, but quietly, steadily, fully. You no longer need anything from them. You simply wish them peace. And you too, have found your own. No bitterness, no expectations, just clarity. You once loved, you once waited, and now you walk forward without looking back. You no longer hope they'll return. You only hope for one thing now, peace. Some things feel like the end, but in truth, they are beginnings disguised by pain. You once thought their departure was the greatest loss of your life. You once believed you wouldn't survive it. You once believed no one else could ever fill that void. But time didn't heal you. You chose to heal. You cried enough. You were silent enough. You waited long enough. And then one day, you no longer wished for anything to return, because you realized you were the one you had been searching for all along. You used to live through the gaze of others, used to adjust your voice, your words, your feelings, just to keep someone from leaving. Used to shrink, step back, slow down, just to hold on to a fragile connection. But now, you don't need to do that anymore. You don't need to beg someone to stay. Don't need to trade parts of yourself just to keep them. Don't need to love with everything you have, only to be loved in fragments. You are no longer the woman you used to be, the one who held it all in so she wouldn't be left behind, the one who bit her lip so her emotions wouldn't inconvenience anyone, the one who stepped aside so someone else could take space they weren't sure they wanted. Now, you are the one who dares to stand in truth, dares to say no to what no longer honors you, dares to choose yourself, even if your heart is still healing. You know now that love isn't about holding someone at all costs. Love is knowing when to let go for the peace of both souls. You've stopped waiting for someone to rescue you because you've become gentle enough to hold your own heart. You've stopped asking why they left and started asking, why did I stay so long? You no longer look in their direction. You look in your own, at the parts of you that have grown, that have become wise, that learned to rise after being left behind. You've learned how to hold your own hand when you tremble, how to wipe your own tears without shame, how to say, I'm okay, not to hide, but because you truly are, because you've made it through the storm, not without wounds, but without letting those wounds lead you anymore. You understand now that everyone who comes and goes has a reason. Some are lessons, some are beautiful memories, and sometimes it is the pain itself that leads you back to your soul. Today, you don't need anyone to complete you. You are the one who has pieced yourself back together in silence. You don't need anyone to call your name in a crowded room, because you've learned to hear your own voice in the quiet. You don't need love to validate your worth. You are love, and that is why you are still soft, still kind, but no longer as easily broken. Because you've learned the most important truth. An ending is not a loss. An ending is the beginning of a new woman, a woman who no longer needs to be chosen because she has chosen herself, A woman who no longer needs someone to give her value, because her value lives in her heart. Born from the breaking. A woman who no longer searches for love, because she has become love in the way she lives, breathes, and walks through the world. If someone is deep enough to see that, they won't leave. And if they do, she won't chase, because now her peace no longer depends on anyone. It depends on one person only, the one reading this, the one who's walked the whole journey, the one who has finally learned. The greatest love is the love you give yourself, unconditional, without expectation, without fear of being left behind. A love that is enough to begin again. A life written from the heart. The end is not a loss. It's life's way of whispering, welcome home to yourself. If these words have touched you, take a moment to slow your breath and remember that you are not alone on this journey. If you feel comforted, please share this video with someone who is also learning to let go gently. And if you'd like to continue walking alongside messages of healing like this, feel free to subscribe and leave a note. Not for the algorithm, but because sometimes the right words at the right time can help someone stay with themselves. Thank you for being here. Truly,